On Father's Day, my daughter, Kara, handed me a crumpled $2 lottery ticket, while her father-in-law, Eric, got a $13,000 cruise package paid with my own money. Kara laughed, tossing the ticket across the dining table with that familiar smirk. If I'm lucky, half of it is mine, she teased. I forced a smile, smoothing the paper against the tablecloth with my weathered fingers, but inside my chest was boiling. That tiny ticket might not seem like much, but it carried more potential than Kara or anyone could imagine. Oh, but wait, Kara said, her voice rising with theatrical excitement. I haven't given Eric his gift yet. She reached behind her chair and produced a sleek, expensive-looking gift box. The ribbon alone could have paid for a week's groceries. Eric straightened in his chair, his posture perfect, his shirt crisp under the afternoon sunlight streaming through my small windows. Kara lifted the golden cruise tickets from their silk-lined box. These cost $13,000, she said, handing them to him with a flourish. Eric deserves the best for everything he's done for our family. The weight of my lottery ticket suddenly felt microscopic. Eric's manicured fingers traced the gold embossing as he smiled in approval. Now this is what I call a proper gift, he said, his eyes briefly meeting mine. Your father taught you well. A hush fell over the table. Margaret cleared her throat. Tommy stared at his hands, and I gripped my tiny ticket, my hands threatening to shake. Kara laughed, sharp and bright. Some people show love through grand gestures. Others? She gestured vaguely at my $2 ticket. I appreciate the thought, Kara, I said, keeping my voice steady. Oh, it's just a little joke. She waved dismissively. But seriously, if you hit the jackpot, remember half is mine. I paid for it after all, Eric chuckled. Unaware of the storm quietly brewing across the table, I looked down at the ticket again. $2, a piece of paper that could change everything. And when it did, Kara would finally learn the lesson she'd earned. Dinner continued. But the energy at the table had shifted. Plates clinked softly, but every laugh, every comment, seemed to carry an undercurrent of awkwardness. Kara was radiant, effortlessly charming, the center of attention as she watched Eric admire the cruise tickets. Meanwhile, I nursed my drink, gripping the lottery ticket like it was a lifeline. Really, Lee? Kara said, leaning forward with a sly grin. You don't look thrilled about your gift, I forced a laugh, keeping my tone calm, though my mind was anything but. It's thoughtful, Kara, very thoughtful. Her smirk widened. Thoughtful? $2. Come on, Dad, lighten up. It's the thought that counts. I felt my jaw tighten. The thought that counts. That line had never sounded more condescending in my life. I watched her across the table as she leaned toward Eric, whispering something I couldn't hear. They shared a small laugh, a look passing between them that made my stomach twist. Margaret shifted in her seat, clearing her throat again. So, Lee, how's work been? She asked, trying to steer the conversation into safer territory. I smiled politely. Busy as usual. My eyes, however, never left Kara and Eric. Every gesture, every laugh, every tilt of her head, it all felt calculated. Deliberate Tommy, my nephew, kept fidgeting with his fork, eyes darting between the gifts and me. I could feel his curiosity, the tension in the air, thick enough to taste. I wondered if he realized what Kara was doing, or if he just thought it was normal. Kara, of course, remained oblivious, or perhaps she wanted me to feel small. She held the cruise tickets delicately, letting them glint in the light. Eric, you deserve the best. Always, she said, voice honey smooth. Eric nodded, still smiling, his perfect composure intimidating. I appreciate it, truly. Thank you, Kara. I stared down at my lottery ticket, the edges crumpled from my grip. $2. $2, yet I felt its weight growing in my hands. It was insignificant now to anyone else, but I knew its potential. I knew what it could mean, and as much as I wanted to let her smugness irritate me, I also recognized the opportunity. Kara wasn't just teasing. She was showing me, showing everyone, how little she valued my presence compared to Eric's. The fancy gift, the theatrical presentation, it was all a statement. And I would respond in kind, just in a way she'd never see coming. The rest of dinner passed in a blur. Kara chattered. Eric nodded approvingly, and I quietly calculated. $2, a ticket, a potential fortune, and a lesson Kara was about to learn the hard way. As dessert was served, I caught a glimpse of her hand brushing against Eric's, that fleeting touch, casual and familiar, tightened the knot in my chest. She thought she was untouchable, invincible in her little world of privilege and charm. But all it would take was one turn of fate, and that, her ticket, to completely change the table dynamics. Tucked the ticket carefully into my wallet, feeling a quiet satisfaction. The storm was not yet visible, but it was coming. Kara might have thought this Father's Day was hers to control, but Lee was about to remind everyone at that table exactly who deserved respect and who got what they earned. Before I continue, Tal, from which place are you watching this story right now? Please subscribe and like the video for motivation. The days after Father's Day passed in a strange haze. Kara continued her little performance at home, always with that sharp smirk, always reminding me in subtle ways how much she favored Eric. I kept my distance, quietly observing, letting her think she was in control, but every time I caught a glimpse of the lottery ticket tucked in my wallet, I felt a surge of quiet power. $2, a piece of paper that everyone dismissed as insignificant. Yet I knew that paper could rewrite the rules of our little family hierarchy. One evening, Kara flopped onto the couch, still talking about Eric's cruise. He's been raving about it all week, Dad. Honestly, I think he loved it more than I imagined. She glanced at me, eyebrows raised, expecting a reaction. I simply nodded, letting her chatter fill the room while I sipped my coffee. It wasn't anger that I felt anymore. It was strategy. Let her bask in her victory. Let her enjoy her moment of superiority. All of that would change soon. Then, one quiet night, I decided to check the numbers on my ticket. Heart pounding, I squinted at the small digits printed on the flimsy paper. And there it was. A match, then another, and another. I froze. The reality hit me like a punch to the gut. Every number matched. Every single one. My $2 ticket had just become a life-altering fortune. The world around me seemed to slow. Kara's laughter from another room. The distant hum of the refrigerator. Even the soft tick of the wall clock. It all became background noise to the realization that my life had just changed. Thought about Kara, about Eric, about the smug satisfaction on her face as she handed me that tiny ticket. She thought she was clever, that she'd made a joke at my expense. She thought she was untouchable. I slid the ticket back into my wallet, hand steady now with a cold, focused determination. This was more than just money. This was leverage. This was a lesson waiting to be taught. Kara would learn, sooner or later, that small gestures could carry the weight of mountains. That underestimating someone, especially their patience, their quiet observation, and their chance at fortune, was a mistake she would never make again. Leaned back in my chair, taking a deep breath. The storm had begun, though she couldn't see it yet. And when the time came, she would remember this moment, the moment she laughed at me with her smirk, the moment she thought she had won. Because soon the roles would be reversed, and Lee, the man she underestimated, would be the one holding all the power. Over the next few weeks, life at home felt like walking through a minefield, only I was the one quietly placing the charges. Kara, as usual, floated through her days with that effortless confidence, unaware that the world was quietly shifting beneath her feet. Every time she mentioned Eric's cruise, I smiled politely, hiding the storm building inside me. Dad, Eric couldn't stop talking about the suite, she said one evening, tossing a magazine onto the table. He says the view is unbelievable. I nodded, keeping my face calm. Sounds wonderful. Kara, I'm glad he enjoyed it. Her laugh echoed across the room, light and sharp, completely unbothered by my presence. But I noticed the way she always brushed past me with exaggerated casualness, as if reminding me of my place at the table. That little ritual stung more than she could imagine. At night, I found myself staring at the lottery ticket again. $2, a trivial amount in her eyes. But in mine, it was a weapon, a key, a symbol of patience rewarded. I imagined what the next step would look like, how the revelation would land. Kara had built a world where she thought she held all the power, and I had quietly infiltrated it. One afternoon, while she was chatting about Eric's upcoming business trip, I let a small comment slip. You know, I said casually, lotteries can be tricky. Sometimes people win. Sometimes they don't. It's always a gamble. Kara looked at me, eyes narrowing slightly, the first flicker of doubt crossing her perfect composure. Oh, Dad, it's just $2. Don't get all dramatic, she said, waving me off. But the edge in her voice betrayed a small uncertainty. I smiled faintly, savoring it. Just a taste, nothing more. The power of that ticket wasn't in the money yet. It was in expectation, in the slow creeping doubt that I was planting in her mind. Family. Dinners became a delicate dance. Kara still laughed, still made Eric the center of attention, but I noticed subtle cracks. A hand that lingered on her fork a second too long. A pause before her next comment. A quick glance at me that wasn't entirely playful. She had begun to notice something shifting, though she didn't know what, and I waited, quietly, patiently, because when the moment came to reveal the truth, it wouldn't just be about winning money. It would be about respect. About showing her that gestures, however small, carried weight. About teaching her that arrogance and mockery had consequences. Tucked the ticket back into my wallet, feeling its power pulse quietly against my chest. The storm wasn't visible yet, but it was gathering strength, growing, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Kara had been confident, untouchable, untamed, but every empire falls eventually. And Lee had just found his opening. The weeks after Father's Day became a subtle battlefield, one in which Kara thought she was winning every move. She flitted through the house with her usual bravado, recounting Eric's praise for the cruise, comparing it to past gifts she claimed no one could match. Every laugh, every story, was carefully measured for effect, or so she thought. I observed it all quietly, sipping my coffee in the mornings as she animatedly described Eric's reaction to every tiny detail of his trip. "Dad, you should have seen the pool," she said one morning, tossing a photograph across the counter. The water was crystal clear, and the cabana, don't even get me started. He couldn't stop raving about it. I nodded, smiling faintly, as though I shared in her excitement. But inside, my thoughts were far from admiration. I was cataloging every gesture, every tone, every subtle flex of her newfound sense of superiority. Kara had made the classic mistake of assuming that the trivial $2 lottery ticket meant nothing, that I was powerless. That belief was her first and only miscalculation. Late one evening, after everyone had gone to bed, I retrieved the ticket from its hiding place. The numbers hadn't changed, but their significance had grown exponentially in my mind. I traced them with a finger, imagining the possibilities, the life I could carve out for myself, and the lesson I could deliver to Kara. It wasn't just about money. It was about respect, recognition, showing her that she couldn't belittle me, that she couldn't flaunt privilege at my expense and expect no consequences. Over dinner, I let little hints slip, barely noticeable, small comments that hinted at possibility. "You know, Kara," I said casually one evening, "sometimes even the smallest things can turn into something unexpected. Life has a funny way of rewarding patience." She laughed, waving me off. "Oh, Dad, you and your cryptic wisdom. $2 isn't exactly going to make anyone rich." I smiled, letting her words sink in. Exactly as planned. Let her underestimate me. Let her believe she was untouchable. And yet, there was a subtle shift I noticed in her demeanor. A twitch at the corner of her eye. A slight hesitation in her laugh. The way she glanced at my wallet once, then quickly looked away. My patience had begun to work. The seed of doubt had been planted. Meanwhile, family dinners grew increasingly uncomfortable for her. Eric still basked in his own admiration, but I could sense Kara's little cracks growing. She laughed more nervously, moved with less certainty, and occasionally tripped over her words when trying to impress. One afternoon, I let my curiosity take over. I called her aside under the guise of helping her organize the kitchen. As we stood side by side, I casually mentioned, lotteries can be life-changing. Sometimes even from the smallest investment. Her eyes flickered toward mine for just a moment. A subtle tension rose, something she tried and failed to mask with a smile. "You really think so, Dad?" she asked, voice lighter than usual, almost hesitant. I nodded, not giving away too much. "Sometimes the world surprises us when we least expect it." She laughed again, but it was forced, a shadow of uncertainty behind the performance she tried so hard to maintain. It was in that moment that I realized the true power of patience. Kara had treated me with casual disregard, flaunted her privilege, and underestimated my quiet observation. But patience had a way of turning the smallest of things, like a $2 lottery ticket, into absolute leverage. Imagine the moment of revelation, the subtle shift from arrogance to shock. Kara had been confident, untouchable, and proud, but that was about to change. The joke she thought she had played was now mine to finish, carefully, deliberately, and with a sense of poetic justice. For the first time in weeks, I felt a calm satisfaction that had nothing to do with money. It was about strategy, observation, and timing. The storm was approaching, and when it landed, Kara would finally understand exactly who held the power and why small gestures should never be underestimated. Returned the ticket to my wallet, feeling its weight against my chest. $2, a seemingly insignificant amount, dismissed by everyone at the table, but in reality, it had the power to completely upend the family dynamics Kara thought she controlled. And Lee was ready, patient, calm, waiting. It was a quiet Saturday morning when the moment finally arrived. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee in hand, staring at the lottery ticket one last time. $2, insignificant to anyone else, but to me, it was a key, a weapon, a tool for teaching Kara the lesson she so thoroughly deserved. I called her into the kitchen, pretending casualness. "Kara," I said, keeping my voice light, "mind checking something with me?" "Just a quick look at the numbers." Her eyes sparkled with playful curiosity. "Sure, Dad, what is it?" She leaned over my shoulder, smirking, confident, completely unaware. I slowly handed her the ticket, letting her read the numbers. She squinted, trying to process them. Her smirk faltered, then wavered. "Wait, that can't be right." I let the silence stretch. A beat, then another. "Dad, did we just—" She stammered, eyes wide, voice trembling. I smiled faintly, savoring every second of her dawning realization. "We?" I echoed casually, as if this were a normal discussion. "I think the numbers speak for themselves." Her face went pale. The smirk was gone, replaced by disbelief, then panic. No way," she whispered, backing away slightly. I leaned back in my chair, calm, collected, feeling the quiet satisfaction of patience rewarded. $2 had turned into $120 million, and the world she had assumed she controlled was suddenly different. Eric's name came up in her thoughts, I could tell. She glanced at the framed photos of him on the sideboard, realizing that the extravagant cruise she had orchestrated so carefully paled in comparison to this unexpected fortune. Her eyes darted back to me, a mix of shock, fear, and the first trace of humility. I didn't think—" she began, her voice faltering. I held up a hand. $2, Kara. That's all it took. Never underestimate the small things or the people behind them. The shift was immediate and absolute. Kara's laughter, her teasing, her sense of superiority, it evaporated in an instant. She had been confident, untouchable and playful, and now she was forced to face reality. She had been outmaneuvered. Quietly, methodically, Lee had turned the tables. I watched her struggle to process it, the weight of her arrogance finally meeting consequence. This wasn't just money, it was respect, recognition, proof that dismissing someone, underestimating patience and observation, came with consequences. "Dad," she whispered finally, voice subdued. I didn't realize—" I shook my head, smiling faintly, letting her absorb the lesson fully. "It's okay. Kara, life has a funny way of teaching lessons." For the first time, she looked at me not with superiority, but with genuine recognition. The dynamic had shifted irrevocably. Eric, the cruises, the fancy gifts, none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was the quiet power of patience, observation, and the understanding that no one should be underestimated. I tucked the ticket safely back into my wallet, the weight of it heavier now than ever. Kara had learned her lesson, the kind that would stay with her for a lifetime. And as I watched her absorb it, I felt a rare, deep satisfaction, not in the money, not in the win, but in the simple, undeniable truth. The underestimated man, the quiet observer, had won. By the time dinner rolled around that evening, the atmosphere at home had changed completely. Kara moved with careful caution, her usual smirk replaced by a tentative, almost apologetic expression. Eric, blissfully unaware of the storm that had quietly reshaped the family dynamics, chatted about mundane work matters, completely missing the seismic shift at the table. I placed my wallet carefully on the counter, letting the weight of it and the lottery ticket inside speak for itself. The $2 ticket that had been dismissed, ignored, and laughed at was now a tangible, undeniable statement. Kara's eyes flickered toward it. Her lips parted, but no words came. The usual confidence she carried like armor was gone, replaced by a subtle humility. For the first time, She realized that she had been outmaneuvered, not by flashy gifts or grand gestures, but by patience, quiet observation, and a little luck that she had treated as trivial. I poured myself a glass of water, feeling calm, collected, finally allowing myself to enjoy the satisfaction that had been building for months. "Kara," I said softly, "I hope this teaches you something important. That small things matter. That underestimating people can cost you more than you ever imagine." Her gaze met mine, a mixture of shock and respect finally breaking through her pride. I understand, Dad," she whispered, voice tight. I really didn't realize." Eric looked between us, sensing tension but not understanding it. "Is everything okay?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "Everything's fine, Eric. Just a small family lesson about appreciation." Kara shifted in her seat, uncomfortable, aware of how thoroughly the dynamics had changed. No cruise, no fancy gift, no performance could outweigh what had just happened. She had learned a lesson about humility, respect, and the unpredictability of life, the kind that can't be bought or staged. I tucked the ticket back into my wallet, feeling the weight of it again. But more than the money, it was the lesson, the principle that mattered now. Kara had to understand that actions, no matter how small, carried consequences. And Lee, the quiet, patient observer, had finally claimed his due. As I glanced around the table, the rest of the family looked on with subtle acknowledgement. Margaret raised an eyebrow. Tommy fidgeted nervously. And even Eric seemed to sense that something fundamental had shifted. Kara's smirk was gone, replaced by reflection, by understanding, and for once she wasn't in control. I smiled inwardly, savoring the moment. $2. 120 million? A lesson for a lifetime, and the knowledge that respect, earned quietly, patiently, and deliberately, was far more powerful than any extravagant gift or fleeting performance. This Father's Day, the tables had turned. The joke was over, the lesson delivered, and the underestimated man had quietly, irrevocably won. Lee had finally taught Kara the truth. Never dismiss the small things. Never underestimate someone's patience. And never mistake temporary confidence for lasting power. And in that quiet, victorious moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Complete satisfaction.